So on Friday is when the next homework assignment, homework 11, which is budget limitations. We'll be talking about that in today's class. And so that's due before class on Friday. In class on Fridays when I anticipate we'll be going over the solution to the exam together. And then on Friday the 19th, which is our last class meeting before Thanksgiving, is when your projects are due. And so now we're just talking about you've got less than 3 weeks to complete the project. And I haven't been getting a lot of questions. Ordinarily, up to this point, I'd start to be getting students stopping by my office and showing me their spreadsheet and asking questions about things. And so I kind of take the number of questions I get as an indicator of who's working on the project. So if you haven't really gotten going on that yet, now's the time. You're not going to get less busy the further things get in the semester. All right, so now we've moved on to chapter 12 in the book, and we're going to talk about how sometimes it's possible to do different combinations of projects. Up until this point, we've been kind of auditioning projects under the idea that there was only one thing that we were going to do. You know, we were choosing, should we do option A, B, or C? Now, in this next part of the course, we're going to be looking at alternatives that are independent, which means that you can choose from many alternatives and do more than one. Now, when you have that approach and you're accepting more than one project, the limiting factor is how much money is available. And we call that capital rationing because every organization, even those that have really favorable financials or government entities, there's an upper limit to how much money they either have on hand or an upper limit to how much they could affordably borrow. So that investment capital has a maximum. And just as an illustration, I think I've mentioned before that I used to live over in the United Arab Emirates, very close to the city of Dubai. And Dubai is kind of a miraculous place. It's really spectacular when you drive through there and see the great number of mega projects that have been undertaken over the years. There's this palm tree offshore island that was built. They basically just scooped up sand from the surrounding seabed, piled up the sand, and then built luxury homes on top of it. So that's the palm. Do you have a question?
Didn't Dubai also try to make another one of the sand islands about the States or something like that?
Yeah, they had a project called The World. And yeah, The World. And so those are individual islands that are kind of marketed towards multimillionaires and billionaires. They made the islands, but I don't think they've actually built on them.
I think the project kind of fell through.
Yeah, it fizzled out. Yeah, I think during the financial crisis, a lot of the huge real estate projects that were underway, you know, kind of got put on hold temporarily. Those islands are still there, and people may eventually build on them. There's also another palm. This is called the Palm Jumeirah, and that's the neighborhood that it's attached to. There's another palm called Palm Jebel Ali, which is a little bit further down the coast. So they really have a big emphasis on creating additional shoreline because that's high-value property. Everybody wants a beachfront house, and you can see that what this palm does is it maximizes beachfront. Just the long and skinny nature of the palm fronds makes it so that each property has its own section of beach, which is pretty exciting. Another one of their mega projects was the Burj Khalifa, the world's tallest building, and the surrounding development. There's a mall. And the indoor mall near the Burj Khalifa has a really big aquarium that you can go diving in, and it's got amazing shops. But one project that didn't get built was the underwater hotel idea. This is, these other ones have been built, and we've got photos of them. But the underwater hotel, this is just an artist's conception because it never happened. They ran out of investment capital. And so that's just an illustration that even in a place as rich and forward-thinking and glamorous as Dubai, not every project can be undertaken. There are limits. And sometimes what we'll need to do to identify which is the most profitable combination of projects is perform what's known as a capital budgeting study. And I'm going to show you how to do that today, a capital budgeting study. And it starts by just the same thing that we've done with other projects where you develop cash flow estimates, and you could graph that out or you can turn it into a table. And the projects, even though we may accept more than one alternative, we assume that projects are either accepted or rejected, and we don't have partial funding of projects. So in reality, realistically, you could build this Palm the size that it is, but if they realized that wasn't feasible, it's conceivable they could have made it a little bit smaller and still done the project. Any questions so far? Now, the budget limitation is usually defined in a budgeting study, and it'll just be given to you directly. But then if you were to actually do this in the real world, this could potentially be an iterative process where you're going back and forth with banks, and you develop a plan, and you prepare estimates of the potential revenue, and then once you have those financials developed, maybe you'd go to the bank and show them the plan, and they'd assess whether they think it's realistic, and then they could tell you what the interest rate is going to be. Or maybe if it's a big variety of investors, you know, your investment bankers that you're working with start to give you an idea of the cost of capital, and then that allows you to go back to the drawing board and either expand your vision if it's going to be easier to get money than you originally anticipated, or you may need to scale it back. And so this can be a back and forth process in the real world, but for purposes of simplicity in the capital rationing that we do, I'm just going to give you outright budget limit. So that will just be defined at the beginning. And the thing that we're trying to do is maximize return on investment. So just whatever bundle of projects gives us the most profits, then that's the combination of projects that we're going to undertake. So this illustrates the process that's been explained on the previous slide. There can be, let's say, 3 options, A, B, and C. And so you can see that these have been labeled as independent projects. An independent project means that they may be unrelated, that just because you do A doesn't mean you can't do B. You could do both. Whereas a lot of the options we've talked about so far have been mutually exclusive. And so if you're going to be buying one crane, you wouldn't buy also another crane from a different company. You know, we just always assumed that you needed one piece of equipment, and so it was a mutually exclusive either or. But these independent projects, you could select as many of them as fit within the budget limit. Now, of course, you would reject any of the alternatives that have a negative present worth, because when you do this analysis, you're going to know your your MAR, your minimum attractive rate of return, and so that's the discount rate you use. And so when you do an initial screening of the alternatives, there may be some alternatives that get thrown out at the very beginning. But then among those that remain, among the alternatives that are feasible, you would choose as many as you can fit within your investment limit. Okay, now the number of bundles that are available, a bundle is a group of projects. And the equation that you need to remember is if there are m projects, where m is some number, then there's 2 to the m bundles. And so in this illustration we're going to work through for today's in-class exercise, there are 4 projects. And so what I'm saying is that there's 2 to the 4th bundles. 2 to the 4th means 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So that's 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16. So there's 16 possible combinations. So get out a piece of paper. Let's see if you can identify these possible combinations. And so what I'm going to say is that there's 16 of them. 1, 2, 3. I'm just writing this on the whiteboard because sometimes the trickiest part of these is identifying all of the combinations. Ironically, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, now the thing to keep in mind is that like one combination would be A, B, C. So A, B, C is a combination. we're saying that that is the same as CBA. Just putting the letters in a different order doesn't make it a different bundle. It's the same combination. So combination AC is the same as CA. All right, and then the other thing I wanted to mention is that do nothing, so none of them, is also a bundle. So see if you can come up with what are the 16 permutations. If we have A, B, C, and D, what are the 16 options to select from? The 16 combinations. And what we're going to do is use Excel to calculate the initial investment required for each bundle. So for those of you who are following along on the video, you'll see the bundles as I write them here on the spreadsheet. And for those of you here in the classroom, my suggestion is fire up Excel and let's begin with the blank workbook and just get this down on paper, because when we calculate the present worth of each bundle, it'll be a lot easier to do it on Excel than if we had to calculate it by hand. So here up at the top, I'm going to first of all, for part 1, just define what is the budget limit. And so I'm going to call that B, the budget limit, and it's negative 23,500. That's the most we can spend on any combination of bundles. And then I'm going to have a bundle number, the combination, the cost, and whether it's possible. And by what I mean by possible is whether that combination of options is within the budget limit. Okay, so there are 16 bundles, as we know, from 2 to the 4th power. So let me have this pulled down through 16. And so the combination, the first one is A, then B, C, D, AB, AC, AD, BC, BD, CD, ABC, ABD, ACD, BCD, ABCD, and do none. All right. So if we look here at the data, it tells us the initial investment required for each of these projects. So the cost of A is 10,000. The cost of B is 5,500. C is 8,500. And D is 15,000. All right. Now, for AB, for example, obviously I'm not going to get my calculator out and do that math. I could just say equals A plus B, like that, right? But I think there's maybe even a more convenient way to do that. Let me show you a little trick with Excel. Do you see here in this field where it says C9? Because that's where my cursor is. It tells you the name of each box. And so here, for example, where I've got the amount for D, negative 15,000, it's calling that C8. And so you've typed in formulas before, and you already know that you can use these column and row indicators as a way of referencing a cell. But that's not the only way. Like, you can give them names. You could name a cell. So it will have its column and row label, but you could also just give it another label. So this 10,000 here, I'm just going to give it a secondary name. I'm just going to call that A. And so now, when I do a formula, equals A, it knows what location I mean by the letter A. That'll be convenient when we type all these combinations. So label, for example here, B, that's C6, or I'm just going to call it B. All right. Now, C, it's not going to let me just call it C, because that's both the column that I'm in, but also what I'd want to call it. So I can't just call it C. See, it doesn't know how to distinguish between the column that you're in and that label. So instead, I'm going to label it SEE. And I guess that's simpler, right? And then this one I'm going to call D. All right, so AB, I'll just do equals A plus B equals A plus C. Oh, I have a typo there. Oh, A plus C. Oh, C I'm calling SEE. Right, of course. Equals A plus D. So let's just go through and find our cost of each bundle. Now, I think it helps to see whether you maybe have made a mistake if the comma is in there. So you can get that comma by formatting as currency, or I think we could just go in here in these preferences and just turn on the comma like that. Oh, I don't like that, the parentheses there. I'll just do currency, and that way I can see the comma. It makes it a little bit more obvious if I've missed something. All right, now it would be tedious if I put in a yes or a no manually comparing the cost to each one of these. Like I could just look at it. So yes, 10,000 will work because our maximum budget limit is 23,500. What we want it to do is 23,500, it should say yes, that it's possible. But anything more than that, and it should say no. So I'm going to do a conditional formatting and an if function. So I'm going to say equals if, you can follow along here, parentheses. Now it's doing a logical test. Our logical test is we want if this number is less negative than 23,500. So think in mathematical terms, we want the cost to be a greater number than 23,500, greater than or equal to. Because, for example, 24, this negative 24,000, it should say no for that, because that's too much money. But 24,000 is the negative 24,000 is more negative than 23,500. So the logical test is going to be if this number is greater than or equal to this amount, and I'll anchor the reference there because I always want it to look up into that cell. So if this number is greater than or equal to, then we should have it say yes. Otherwise, it should say no. It's not possible. So this logic test is, first of all, a criteria. If our number is greater than or equal to the budget limit, then yes, it is possible. Otherwise, no. I always forget if it's the double quotation marks or the single quotation marks. And so I'll put enter, and maybe it'll give me an error message, and I'll have to change to a different style quotation marks. Let's see. Okay, it's working so far, but the real thing, to test this, it should say that this is a yes, and it should say no to the one below it. So let me drag this function down, and it should say yes to this. Oh, it's saying yes to everything. So something's not right, because it should have discriminated that. A. Oh, it's still looking up at A. That's what it is. Because A is an actual cell reference. It's always looking in the same spot. So let me start it off by putting in C5. I'll refer to it by its cell location rather than by its name. And maybe now when I drag it down, it will use the right locations. All right. So it is identifying a yes for the 23,500, so it should, and then no's for everything that's over the budget limit. Okay, so any questions so far on this feasibility analysis? So we found that there were 16 bundles, and of those, let's see, how many are feasible? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 are feasible bundles. So let's just check back with this. How many feasible bundles are there? Okay, so there's 10 feasible bundles. You know what's even easier than counting manually? Instead of saying yes, what if we had it return the number 1 if it's feasible, and return the number 0 if it's not feasible? Okay, so now it's going to say either a 1 or a 0. And then what I could do down here at the bottom is just add it up. So sum of this, and then it's going to tell me 10. Because, you know, possible is a 1, impossible is 0. So maybe rather than the yes, no, giving it a numeric result is even more useful. All right, so that's part 1, the screening, where we're finding out which of them are within the budget limit. So, you know, maybe A, B, C, D would be a great option, but we don't have enough money to do all 4 of those projects. It's interesting that some of the 2 project options aren't feasible. A and D, for example, that's only 2 projects, but it's over the limit. Yeah. And there's none of the 3 project options we can do. Right? Yeah, none of the 3 project options or the 4 project option. All right, so that was part 1. Now over here in part 2, what we need to do is find the overall profitability. So on the next slide, it defines for us what is our MAR, 12%. Each project lasts for 8 years, and then we know the annual net cash flow for each of these. Let me copy this table over so we can look at it. Here's our data. All right, so we've got the MAR. That's our discount rate that we're going to be, any future revenues will be discounted to the present at 12%. The number of years is 8. So here the data that we have about the project, the annual net cash flow, that's the profits. So for project A, we spend $10,000 to get the project, and then every year for 8 years, it delivers $2,500 in profit for that year. So what we're going to try and find out is what's the present worth of project A. So let's put in all of our bundles again. So here's our bundle, the cost, annual net cash flow, and then the present worth of the bundle. So now we just only want the feasible bundles. So the feasible bundles, A, B, B, C, D, A, B. So if we highlight those, you can see down at the bottom it says count 10. That's kind of a nice thing that if you highlight cells, it'll sometimes give you a count or average, just these statistics at the bottom to make sure we haven't forgotten typing anything. Because I know that there's 10 feasible bundles and I just type those in manually. So by highlighting them, and it'll do the count for you down at the bottom. Okay, so the cost for the A is 10,000. I can just drag this down through D. Well, that doesn't seem to be working because it locked the reference A again. Okay. C5. AB, AC, BC, the annual cash flow is this column here. Things are getting a little too wide, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap the text. There's a button on here, this wrap text button, and when you click wrap text, what it allows you to do is it makes it possible to make a column narrower, and then the text will kind of stack on top of each other. And then that way, if I wrap the text there, and let's say I'll also wrap the text for these columns, then I can make them narrower and see everything on the same screen. All right, yeah. So, okay, bundle A, the annual net cash flow. That's just talking about the revenue minus the costs in a given year. So A is this bundle. Okay, I'm going to pause the recording and I'm going to stop for a moment. I think you probably see what direction this is all headed in. We have a cost. This is the initial cost. So this is already at the present. The annual net cash flow, that's an annual series. So the present worth is going to be the present value of the annual series plus the outflow that was already at time 0. So what we want to do is find the present value of each of these bundles, and then of all 10 options, find out which one is the most profitable. Okay, so I'm going to pause for a second, give you a chance to think through this. I'll circulate around with the solution if you want to check. What we're trying to find out is which bundle is the most profitable and how much profit does it generate. All right, so we need to have the annual cash flow for each of the bundles. So AB would be A plus B, AC. This is the revenue that justifies the purchase of the item in the first place, hopefully. B plus D, CD. And then if we do nothing, we get no revenue. All right, so the present value equals PV, and the rate, we want to anchor the reference up here to 12%. For NPER, anchor the reference to the number of periods. The payment is this annual amount. That's what Excel calls an annual series a payment. And I need to do the minus sign for the reason we've talked about on several occasions. All right, and then outside of that, all we've done so far is we have taken the annual series to time 0, and we need to also manually combine it with the initial cost. Okay, so here is all of our present values, and we can look and see like which is the best one and visually do that. But there's also an automatic way to identify that. If you highlight the range, like highlight all of them, and then up here, conditional formatting. So let's do a new rule. And the new rule we're going to do is format only the top or bottom ranked value. Okay, so the top 1. And then the format that we're going to have it do, let's have it bold and also fill it with yellow. All right, so that'll make it easy to see which one is the top 1. Okay, and then there it is. And the nice thing about this formatting is, like, if we were going to change, like, what if it turned out that really option A gets more revenue than initially we thought? Instead of 2,500, what if it was 3,500? So that's going to change the present value of everything associated with A. Let me change a different one. So let's say B. Instead of 1,300, what if it is $2,600. So that changed which option was most valuable, and so you notice the conditional formatting reacts automatically. So anyways, that is a capital rationing study. We've just applied the idea of a budget limit to find out which bundles are most profitable. So we have 2 minutes remaining. Let me pull open the homework assignment really quickly, and let's take a look at that and see how it relates to what we've just gone over in today's class. This homework assignment's due on Friday, so you've got a little bit of time for that, but not a whole week. So hopefully it's pretty closely related to what we've just done. Homework 11. All right, budget limitation. So you have a budget limit defined, a MAR is given, a useful life of options, and you've got all these alternatives. So it's the same thing we've just done in the in-class exercise. Find out which of the alternatives is within the budget limit, find the present worth of each bundle, and you choose the bundle that has the highest present worth. And the fact that they have different useful lives for each bundle option, that doesn't change things. Just all that means is that you're going to use a different number of periods for finding the present worth of that option. So the second problem, there's only 2 problems. Oh, 3. Here's the third one, but it's related to the second one. Cumulative savings balance. This problem is to get you thinking about how the spreadsheet should look for the project. Okay. So you actually have everything you need to solve the homework assignment that's due on Friday. All right, we're out of time. It's 11:50. That's all I've got for you today. I will see you on Wednesday.